She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She just stepped into the signature cabin wearing a plain jacket and watched the smiles disappear. One pause, one look, one sentence that quietly said, "You might be in the wrong place." Funny thing is, she wasn't. Naomi Carter arrived early, the way people do when they don't want attention. She moved through the terminal without rushing, without hesitation, blending into the steady flow of travelers who all looked equally tired and equally anonymous. Her boarding pass was already loaded on her phone. Her bag fit the size requirements exactly. Nothing about her asked for special handling. At the gate, Brian Holt scanned her pass once, then again. The screen beeped, not in error, but not in approval either. He tilted his head slightly, the way people do when they're deciding whether something belongs. "Just a moment," he said. It wasn't rude, it wasn't loud. It sounded like policy. Amy stepped aside while the line continued behind her. A couple in tailored jackets passed without slowing. A man wearing noise-canceling headphones didn't even look up. Brian tapped a few keys, asked for her ID, compared it to the screen longer than necessary. Everything he did was correct. Everything he did took just a little longer. By the time Naomi walked down the jet bridge, the plane was already boarding Group 3. She was assigned to the signature cabin, but no one announced it. No one escorted her. She found her way on her own. Inside, Evelyn Brooks was already watching. Evelyn had been managing premium cabins for over a decade. She knew the difference between a problem and an inconvenience. She also knew the difference between people who belonged and people who surprised her. Naomi placed her bag in the overhead bin above her seat. It fit easily. She sat down, buckled in, opened nothing, asked for nothing. Evelyn approached with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good afternoon," she said. "May I see your boarding pass?" Naomi handed over her phone. Evelyn studied it longer than the interaction required. Then she nodded, handed it back, and didn't leave. "We'll just need to verify something," she said. Routine. That word again. Routine meant delay without explanation. Routine meant authority without friction. Other passengers were already being offered drinks. Crystal glasses clinked softly. A tray passed Naomi's row without stopping. Not intentionally, just smoothly. Brian appeared at the cabin entrance, tablet in hand. "There was a discrepancy at boarding," he said, loud enough for Evelyn, quiet enough for Naomi. "What kind?" Evelyn asked. "Nothing major, just flagged." Flagged didn't mean wrong, it meant questionable. Naomi stayed still. She didn't interrupt. She didn't defend herself preemptively. She had learned long ago that explanations offered too early sound like admissions. Brian asked another question, then another. Where she was flying from, how often she traveled, whether the jacket she was wearing belonged to her. Each question was framed politely. Each one assumed permission. Evelyn nodded along, not challenging, not escalating. Yet. This is how it usually begins. Not with accusations, but with excess scrutiny. Not with hostility, but with procedures applied unevenly. The kind that feel invisible to the people who benefit from them. In organizations like this, no one thinks they're being cruel. They think they're being careful. Psychologists have a term for it, role-based morality. When people operate inside a defined role, they begin to outsource their conscience to the title, the uniform, the checklist. Brian wasn't thinking about Naomi as a person, he was thinking about his responsibility. Evelyn wasn't weighing fairness, she was protecting standards. They weren't asking themselves, "Is this right?" They were asking, "Will this be questioned?" And the answer, in that moment, felt like no. The seatbelt sign chimed off. The cabin door closed. The plane pushed back from the gate. 20 minutes into the flight, Naomi still hadn't been offered anything to drink. She didn't raise her hand. She didn't make eye contact. Silence, too, can be a strategy. Evelyn returned with a clipboard this time. "Just one more thing," she said, "for our records." Naomi glanced at the paper. Blank lines, no explanation. Around them, the cabin hummed with quiet privilege. Laptops opened, shoes loosened. A child laughed softly 2 rows up. No one noticed the pause at seat 1A. This is the moment people later point to and say, "That's when it crossed the line." But lines don't feel like lines when you're stepping over them slowly. They feel like adjustments, like small decisions that don't seem to matter. What makes situations like this dangerous isn't ignorance, it's confidence. The belief that the system will absorb the choice and protect the chooser. Brian thought he was being thorough. Evelyn thought she was being responsible. Neither of them thought they were being watched. Naomi signed nothing. She handed the clipboard back untouched. "I'm fine," she said. Evelyn paused, not because of the refusal, but because of the tone. Calm, level, unafraid. "Very well," Evelyn said. "We'll circle back." Circle back meant unfinished business. As Evelyn walked away, Brian remained. He glanced at Naomi's jacket. Plain, unbranded, clean, but unremarkable. He made a note on his tablet. Not a mistake, a choice. Across the aisle, a passenger glanced over, curious, then looked away. The moment passed. The cabin returned to normal. From the outside, nothing had happened. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. The rules were no longer being applied equally. They were being tested, and the people enforcing them believed with quiet certainty that nothing would come of it. Because most of the time, nothing ever does. 10 minutes after takeoff, the cabin settled into its rhythm. Lights dimmed slightly, seatbelts clicked open. The quiet choreography of premium travel resumed, screens flickering on, trays unfolding, voices dropping to that polite murmur reserved for expensive spaces. Naomi Carter remained exactly where she was. No drink, no menu, no acknowledgement. Evelyn Brooks noticed. She always did. She stood at the galley entrance, arms crossed loosely, watching the cabin the way a supervisor watches a floor she believes she owns. Her gaze passed over Naomi once, then twice, lingering just long enough to register a decision. Brian Holt reappeared beside her, tablet tucked under his arm. "Anything else on that flagged passenger?" Evelyn asked. Brian lowered his voice. "The system didn't clear automatically." "That doesn't happen often," Evelyn said. "No," Brian agreed. "But it happens." That was all it took. Evelyn stepped into the aisle, heels clicking softly against the floor. She stopped at Naomi's seat, but didn't lean in. She stayed standing. Above, framed by the overhead bins. "Miss Carter," she said, glancing at the name on her screen. "We're going to need to ask you a few more questions." Naomi looked up, calm, present. "About what?" she asked. "About your booking," Evelyn replied, "and your travel history." Naomi nodded once. "You've already checked that." Evelyn smiled, thin, professional. "This is standard," she said, "for security." Security. The word landed heavy despite its softness. Around them, 2 passengers slowed their conversation. Someone across the aisle glanced over a seat back, then pretended not to. Naomi didn't shift, didn't reach for her bag, didn't preemptively explain herself. Evelyn interpreted that stillness as resistance. "Sir," Evelyn said, turning to Brian, "please notify cabin security. I want this documented." Brian hesitated, just long enough to register the escalation. "Is that necessary?" he asked. Evelyn's eyes didn't leave Naomi. "When something doesn't add up," she said, "it's our responsibility to act." Responsibility. Another word that sounded noble and felt sharp. The call button chimed softly from the galley. Somewhere up front, a crew member acknowledged it. Procedures slid into place. Naomi watched Evelyn carefully now, not with fear, but with attention. This was the moment where authority stopped pretending to be neutral. Evelyn straightened her posture. Her voice lowered, not in volume, but in tolerance. "Miss Carter," she said, "until this is resolved, we'll need you to remain seated and refrain from moving around the cabin." Naomi blinked once. "I wasn't planning to move," she said. Evelyn nodded, as if that response confirmed something. Passengers nearby shifted. One woman adjusted her scarf. A man across the aisle closed his laptop, curiosity sharpening his posture. What they saw was not a confrontation. What they saw was order being enforced. This is the dangerous part. Not the shouting, not the accusation, but the moment when power believes it is justified. Psychologists describe it simply. People rarely see themselves as villains, especially when they can hide behind rules. Evelyn wasn't thinking, "I am targeting this woman." She was thinking, "I am protecting this cabin." Brian wasn't thinking, "This feels wrong." He was thinking, "I'm just following protocol." That's how harm gets permission to speak louder. "Can I ask what specifically you're concerned about?" Naomi said. Her tone was even. No edge, no challenge. Evelyn exhaled, controlled. "There have been instances of ticket misuse," she said. "Unauthorized access to premium cabins. We take that seriously." Naomi nodded. "As you should." Evelyn didn't expect agreement. She stepped closer now, lowering her voice further. "So I'm sure you won't mind cooperating," she said. Cooperating. The word that turns requests into demands. Naomi glanced briefly at the aisle, then back at Evelyn. "I've answered everything you've asked," she said, "more than once." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "This is not a debate," she said. "This is a safety matter." There it was, the final shield. Safety ends conversations. It doesn't need proof. It doesn't tolerate pushback. Brian shifted his weight. "I'll call it in," he said quietly. He turned toward the galley, tablet already open. Naomi watched him go, still silent, still seated, still not explaining herself beyond necessity. To some, that silence looked suspicious. To Evelyn, it looked defiant. And defiance, when filtered through authority, becomes justification. The seatbelt sign flickered briefly, then steadied. The plane climbed smoothly through a layer of clouds. Outside, the sky was bright and calm. Inside, the atmosphere thickened. A uniformed crew member approached, pausing a few rows away, awaiting instruction. Evelyn gestured subtly. "Stay there." Passengers began to sense the shift. This wasn't service anymore. This was control. Naomi felt it too, the invisible line that had been crossed without announcement. She knew this pattern, not just here. Everywhere power lived comfortably. First comes inconvenience, then suspicion, then containment. All under the same banner, "We're just doing our job." Evelyn straightened her blazer. "For now," she said, "we're going to restrict service to your seat." Naomi looked at the empty tray table in front of her. "I don't have any service," she said. Evelyn didn't respond. She turned away, heels clicking back toward the galley, authority reasserted. Brian returned moments later, face tight. "Captain's been notified," he said quietly. Evelyn nodded, satisfied. "Good," she said. Let's keep an eye on her." Naomi remained where she was, unmoved, unflinching. And as the plane continued forward, one thing became clear to everyone watching, whether they admitted it or not. This was no longer about procedure. This was about who was allowed to question power, and who was expected to accept it. 37 minutes into the flight, the first real disruption arrived, quietly. It wasn't an alarm. It wasn't a raised voice. It was a man standing up too fast. Richard Hale had been enjoying the cabin the way he always did, casually, confidently, as if the space existed for his comfort alone. He had loosened his jacket, set it beside him, and placed a small item on the center console between the seats. A habit. A careless one. Now he was patting his pockets. Once. Twice. He frowned. He checked the console again, slower this time, more deliberate. His jaw tightened. "Evelyn," he said, loud enough to carry. "I think something's missing." The cabin shifted instantly. Evelyn Brooks appeared at his side in seconds, posture alert, concern sharpened by the tone of his voice. "What seems to be the problem, sir?" she asked. "My cufflink," Richard said. "Diamond. Limited edition. I took it off before dinner. It was right here." He tapped the console with one finger, hard. Evelyn glanced down, then around. Her eyes swept the immediate area, then lifted, straight across the aisle. They landed on Naomi Carter. Naomi hadn't moved. She was seated exactly where she had been since boarding, hands folded loosely in her lap, tray table empty, expression neutral. But in that moment, stillness became suspicious. "She's been sitting there the whole time," Richard said, following Evelyn's gaze. "Hasn't she?" The question wasn't directed at Naomi. It was directed at permission. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She stepped closer to Richard, lowering her voice. "Are you certain it's missing?" she asked. "I'm certain," he replied. "And I don't misplace things like that." That sentence carried weight, not because of truth, but because of confidence. Evelyn straightened. "Brian," she said, turning sharply, "we have a potential theft." The word hung in the air. The cabin went quiet, in the way expensive places do when something unpleasant intrudes. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Naomi looked up. "Excuse me," she said calmly. "What's going on?" Evelyn didn't answer the question. She took one step closer to Naomi's seat. "Sir," she said to Richard, "we'll handle this." Then, to Naomi, her voice firm now, stripped of courtesy. "Miss Carter, I'm going to need you to stand up." Naomi didn't move. "Why?" she asked. "There's been an allegation," Evelyn said, "and you're the only passenger who has remained in close proximity." Naomi glanced around the cabin. "I haven't left my seat," she said. "Neither has anyone else." Richard scoffed. "I saw her looking over here earlier," he said, "and she's been quiet. Quiet. Different. Unaccounted for." Evelyn nodded once, as if that sealed it. "For everyone's safety," she said, "we need to conduct a check." "A check of what?" Naomi asked. "Your immediate area," Evelyn replied, "and your belongings." Naomi's eyes sharpened slightly. "You don't have my consent," she said. Evelyn's jaw tightened. "This isn't optional," she said. "This is a security matter." There it was again, the word that absolves. Naomi remained seated. "I'm happy to wait for proper authorities," she said. "But you don't get to search me based on a guess." Richard leaned forward. "If you didn't take it," he snapped, "you wouldn't be so defensive." Naomi turned her head slowly. "I'm not defensive," she said. "I'm precise." Evelyn didn't like that. She gestured to Brian, who was already hovering nearby, face pale. "Call the cockpit," she said. We may need to divert. Divert. The word rippled through the cabin. Naomi finally stood, not in compliance, but to be seen. You're escalating without evidence, she said. That's dangerous. Evelyn reached for Naomi's carry-on before Brian could stop her. Do not touch my property, Naomi said. Evelyn ignored her. She opened the bag and tipped it forward, contents spilling onto the seat. A tablet, a notebook, a charger. Nothing else. No cufflink. Richard's face flushed. It could be in her jacket, he said, or her pockets. The accusation didn't sound angry. It sounded certain. Evelyn straightened. Miss Carter, she said, if you cooperate now, we can resolve this quietly. Naomi met her gaze. You've already made it loud, she said. Around them, passengers watched openly now. No one intervened. No one spoke up. The cabin had become a courtroom. Richard was the plaintiff. Evelyn was the judge. Naomi was the defendant. And evidence was optional. Brian swallowed hard. Captain's asking for details, he whispered. Evelyn didn't look at him. Tell him we have a non-compliant passenger suspected of theft, she said. Naomi exhaled slowly. You are making a choice, she said. Right now. Evelyn's eyes flickered. Just once. I'm doing my job, she replied. That's when Richard suddenly froze. He reached down beside his seat, fingers probing the narrow gap between the cushion and the cabin wall. His hand stopped. Slowly, he pulled it back up. Between his fingers was the missing cufflink. The diamond caught the cabin lights. For a moment, no one spoke. Richard stared at it. Evelyn's face drained of color. Naomi said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy, unforgiving. Richard cleared his throat. Well, he said, looks like it slipped. Evelyn straightened, composure snapping back into place. A misunderstanding, she said quickly. These things happen. Naomi looked at her. No, she said quietly. They don't. The cabin remained silent, because everyone there understood exactly what had almost happened, and exactly who it would have happened to. For a few seconds after the cufflink reappeared, the cabin didn't breathe. No one moved. No one spoke. The truth sat there in plain sight, glittering between Richard Hale's fingers. Too small to justify what had just happened. Too obvious to undo it. Evelyn Brooks recovered first. These things happen, she said again, louder this time, as if repetition could smooth the damage. Let's all calm down. Calm down. The phrase people use when they want a moment to disappear. Naomi Carter remained standing, hands relaxed at her sides. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't accused anyone. She hadn't even said, I told you so. She simply waited. Brian Holt shifted awkwardly near the galley, eyes darting between Evelyn and the captain's interphone. He looked like someone who suddenly realized he was standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Richard cleared his throat. Well, he said, forcing a laugh that didn't land. No harm done. No harm. The words floated through the cabin and settled heavily. That was when Lily Morgan stopped pretending to rearrange the service cart. Lily had been there the entire time. Quiet, efficient, invisible in the way junior crew members learned to be. She had followed every instruction, kept her head down, avoided eye contact when things got tense. But now her hands were shaking. She looked at Naomi, then at Evelyn, then at the rest of the cabin, where people were already starting to look away, eager for normalcy to return. Lily swallowed. That's not true, she said. Her voice was soft, almost fragile. Evelyn turned slowly. What did you say? She asked. Lily hesitated. This wasn't courage. This was discomfort reaching a breaking point. No harm wasn't done, Lily said again, louder this time. I was standing right there. I saw what happened. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Lily, she said carefully, this is not the time. It is, Lily replied. The cabin shifted again, this time toward her. I saw the cufflink slide down, Lily said, pointing subtly toward Richard's seat. When he adjusted his jacket, it fell between the cushion and the wall. I noticed it, but she stopped herself. But you didn't say anything, Evelyn finished. Lily nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. I didn't, she admitted. At first. Richard scoffed. So why speak up now? Lily looked up then, straight at him. Because she was about to be punished for something she didn't do, she said. And because this isn't what we're trained for. Silence followed. A heavier one. Evelyn took a step toward Lily, voice firm. You should have reported it immediately, she said. Yes, Lily replied. I should have. Her honesty landed harder than any accusation. I didn't, Lily continued, because I was afraid. And because I thought it wasn't my place. She paused, then added, but it was. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. This is a crew matter, she said. We'll handle it internally. No, Lily said quietly. This became a passenger matter when we treated her like a problem instead of a person. Naomi didn't move, didn't interrupt, didn't thank her. She simply watched Lily with steady attention. Brian took an unconscious step back, as if distance might absolve him. This is inappropriate, Evelyn said sharply. You're overstepping. Lily nodded again. I know, she said, and I accept whatever comes with that. That sentence changed the temperature in the room, because it wasn't defiance. It was responsibility. Passengers began to murmur now, not loudly, just enough. The spell of silence had broken. Evelyn looked around and realized something dangerous. Control was slipping. She turned to Naomi. We apologize for the inconvenience, she said, clipped, professional. You may return to your seat. Naomi met her gaze. I never left it, she said. The words were simple. They cut anyway. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She turned back to Lily. We'll discuss this after landing, she said. You're dismissed. Lily nodded and stepped back toward the galley, heart racing, hands cold. She had no idea what would happen next, only that she couldn't take the silence back. As Lily passed Naomi, their eyes met for a brief moment. Naomi didn't smile. She gave a single nod. Not gratitude. Recognition. The cabin slowly resumed its hum, but something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just about a mistaken accusation anymore. It was about a choice. Someone who had nothing to gain had spoken anyway, and everyone else felt it. Evelyn retreated toward the galley, posture rigid, mind racing. The situation had not resolved the way it was supposed to. Brian stared at the floor, replaying every moment he hadn't intervened. Richard sank back into his seat, suddenly aware of how exposed he felt. And Naomi Carter sat down calmly, smoothing her jacket, as if none of this had shaken her. But it had shaken the system. Because before her identity was revealed, before authority flipped, before consequences arrived, the silence had cracked. And once that happens, there's no pretending nothing happened. The flight continued, but the story had already changed direction. 22 minutes after the cufflink incident, the cabin looked calm again. Seatbelt signs were off. Drinks were being refreshed. The hum of the engines returned to its steady, comforting rhythm. From the outside, it looked resolved. But Evelyn Brooks knew better. She stood near the galley, reviewing the incident report on her tablet. Her fingers moved quickly, confidently, choosing words that softened edges. Misunderstanding, passenger concern, resolved on board. Language was a shield. She'd used it for years. Brian Holt hovered nearby, pretending to reorganize glassware. He hadn't said much since Lily spoke up. He kept replaying the moment in his head, the way the situation had slipped just slightly out of Evelyn's control. Naomi Carter sat quietly in her seat, eyes forward, posture relaxed. If anyone was watching closely, they might notice something subtle. She wasn't rattled. She hadn't rushed to defend herself. She hadn't demanded apologies. She hadn't tried to win the room. She was waiting. Evelyn finished typing and closed the report. She exhaled, then turned toward Naomi's seat. "Ms. Carter," she said, voice crisp, professional. "May I speak with you privately?" Naomi looked up. "Of course," she replied. They stepped into the small service alcove near the galley. Brian stayed behind. Lily was nowhere in sight. Evelyn folded her hands. "I want to acknowledge that things escalated earlier," she said. "Our priority is always safety and comfort for all passengers." Naomi nodded once. "I understand," she said. "That's why I didn't interfere." Evelyn paused. "You didn't," she said carefully. "Which is appreciated." Naomi met her gaze. "I wasn't here to interfere," she said. "I was here to observe." The word landed softly. Observe. Evelyn's expression flickered. "Observe what?" she asked. Naomi reached into her bag, not abruptly, not theatrically, slowly, deliberately. She pulled out a slim device, matte black, no branding. She tapped it once. The screen lit up. "I'm Naomi Carter," she said, "Lead Cultural Compliance Auditor for North Sky Airlines." Evelyn blinked. The title didn't register at first. Auditor. Not CEO, not owner, not someone you bow to instinctively, but something worse. An evaluator. "I'm assigned to conduct unannounced in-situ assessments of frontline decision-making," Naomi continued, "especially in high-pressure environments." Evelyn's throat tightened. "This flight," Naomi added, "was part of that scope." Evelyn straightened instinctively. "There must be some mistake," she said. "We weren't notified of." "That's the point," Naomi replied calmly. She held up the device. On the screen, timestamps, crew IDs, logged actions. Evelyn recognized her own name. "And just to be clear," Naomi said, "I didn't document errors. I documented choices." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "You're not authorized to," she began. Naomi tilted the screen slightly. A secure system interface filled it. Internal, executive level, authorization confirmed. Evelyn fell silent. "What happens now?" she asked. Naomi didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked past Evelyn toward the cabin, toward the passengers who had already begun forgetting what they'd witnessed. "The flight continues," Naomi said. "For now." Evelyn frowned. "You're not diverting?" she asked. "No," Naomi replied. "Not yet." She slipped the device back into her bag. "Real culture," she said, "reveals itself when people think the moment has passed." Evelyn swallowed. "And the report?" she asked. Naomi met her eyes. "It's already sinking," she said. A quiet chime echoed from the cockpit door. Brian stiffened as his tablet vibrated. He glanced at the screen. His face drained of color. In the cockpit, the captain read a notification he hadn't expected. Cultural Compliance Audit, active. Do not alter flight plan without confirmation. The plane stayed its course. No announcement was made. No spectacle followed. That was the most unsettling part. Naomi returned to her seat, picked up her book, turned a page. Around her, the cabin resumed its rhythm, unaware that every decision made from this point forward was being recorded, not just by cameras or systems, but by consequence. Evelyn stood frozen for a moment longer, then slowly walked back toward the galley. Her posture was still upright, professional, but the certainty was gone. She had believed power came from authority, from control, from being the final word in the cabin. She was wrong.
Power, it turned out, came from systems you couldn't argue with, from processes you couldn't charm, from someone who didn't need to announce themselves because the system already knew who they were. As the plane pushed deeper into open airspace, 1 hour farther from any runway, the realization settled in. Whatever happened next couldn't be undone. And Naomi Carter hadn't even raised her voice. She hadn't demanded justice. She had simply let the system watch. And that was enough. Now pause the story, just for a moment. Take Naomi's title out of it. Remove the device. Erase the system watching quietly in the background. No auditor, no authority, no safety net. Just imagine the same woman, on the same flight, in the same seat, without power. The cufflink still disappears. The accusation still lands on her. The silence still wraps around the cabin. But this time, nothing interrupts it. No chime from the cockpit. No internal system syncing in real time. No report being written somewhere she can't see. Only people. In that version of the story, Naomi doesn't get invited to a private conversation near the galley. She doesn't get asked politely to explain herself. She doesn't get to observe. She gets told to comply. She gets asked to stand longer, to empty her pockets, to explain herself again, slower this time. Her calm is misread as guilt. Her precision is called attitude. Her silence becomes proof of something she never did. In that version, Evelyn's language doesn't soften. It hardens. Procedure, safety, policy. Words that sound neutral, but cut the same way every time. Brian doesn't hesitate. He follows instructions, because following instructions is safer than questioning them. Lily still notices the cufflink fall, but she keeps quiet, because in this version, speaking up costs her more than staying silent. And Richard? Richard never feels exposed. He feels justified, because the room supports him, because the system bends toward him, because nothing challenges the assumption that he belongs, and she doesn't. In that version, the flight doesn't continue calmly. Naomi is escorted, quietly but publicly enough. Not in handcuffs, not dramatically, just enough to humiliate, just enough to mark her. People watch. Some feel uncomfortable. Most feel relieved it isn't them. And when she finally leaves the cabin, the story ends there. No apology follows her down the jet bridge. No report questions what happened. No consequences arrive later. The system closes ranks. By the time the plane lands, the incident has already been rewritten. Passenger disruption, resolved on board. Crew acted appropriately. And Naomi goes home carrying something heavier than embarrassment. She carries the question, what did I do wrong? That question doesn't come from guilt. It comes from being treated like the problem long enough that you start looking inward. That's the version of the story most people live in. Not the viral one. Not the satisfying one. The quiet one. The one where nothing explodes, but something erodes. Because when power isn't present, justice becomes optional. It depends on who speaks, who is believed, who the system protects by default. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people watching this story relate more to that version than the one with the twist. They've been delayed without explanation, questioned without cause, dismissed without apology. They've learned how to stay calm, how to stay polite, how not to escalate. And still, it wasn't enough. That's why the reveal feels good, because it answers a question we're scared to ask out loud. What if dignity only arrives with status? What if respect isn't a right, but a privilege? In the real world, most injustices don't end with someone losing their job. They end with someone learning to shrink, learning to lower their voice, to dress differently, to over-explain, learning to anticipate suspicion before it arrives. The twist makes us feel safe because it restores balance, but the hypothetical is what makes us honest. Because without power, Naomi doesn't win. She survives. And survival isn't justice. It's adaptation. That's the part of the story we don't like to sit with, because it forces a harder question than who was wrong. It asks whether our systems actually protect people or just protect themselves, and whether the respect we offer is truly unconditional or quietly transactional. The plane in the real story keeps flying, but in this version, the moment passes and nothing changes. Which is exactly why this question matters, not because Naomi had power, but because most people don't. Lily Morgan didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam a table or point a finger. She did something much quieter than that. She spoke. Not loudly, not confidently, just clearly enough to be heard. And that's what changed the room. Because until that moment, Lily had done what most people do when something feels wrong but inconvenient. She stayed still. She stood close enough to see everything, and far enough to pretend it wasn't her responsibility. She watched Naomi get delayed, questioned, cornered. She watched procedures stretch longer than necessary. She noticed the way Evelyn's tone sharpened and Brian stopped making eye contact. She noticed the cufflink fall. And she said nothing. Not because she agreed, not because she believed the accusation, but because she understood the rules of survival better than the rules of justice. Lily had a job, a schedule, a supervisor watching. And in environments like this, silence feels safe. It keeps you employed, unnoticed, uninvolved. That's what silence promises. But silence also does something else. It quietly takes a side. When Lily finally spoke, the cabin didn't erupt. There was no applause, no relief, just a pause. A sharp, uncomfortable pause. Because the moment someone says, "That's not what I saw," everything else has to stop pretending. Evelyn didn't argue immediately. She recalculated. Brian didn't interrupt. He waited for instructions. And the passengers who had been watching suddenly became very interested in their screens, because Lily's words didn't just challenge an accusation. They challenged the comfort of inaction. Silence had allowed the situation to grow, to escalate, to feel justified. And now, that silence was gone. Here's the part we don't like to admit. Most harm in systems like this doesn't come from the loudest person in the room. It comes from the many quiet ones who decide not to interfere. They don't invent the accusation. They don't enforce the punishment. They just don't stop it. And that absence adds up. Because every time no one speaks, the system learns something. It learns what it can get away with. It learns how far it can push. It learns who matters enough to defend and who doesn't. Silence doesn't need to shout to be powerful. It just needs to last long enough. Lily didn't suddenly become brave. She became tired. Tired of watching something wrong unfold and knowing she'd be part of the story whether she liked it or not. Because here's the truth. Being silent doesn't remove you from the outcome. It just removes your voice from the record. And when everything is over, silence doesn't protect you from the question. It just delays it. What did you do when it mattered? People like to believe neutrality exists, that you can stand in the middle and remain untouched. But neutrality is a luxury of distance, and Lily was too close. So are most of us. We see the email that crosses a line, the joke that goes too far, the policy that hits one group harder than another, and we hesitate. Not because we don't understand, but because we calculate. Is it worth it? Will it cost me? Will anyone back me up? Silence feels like the rational choice, until you realize rational choices can still be unethical ones. Lily's voice didn't undo the damage. It didn't erase the accusation. It didn't restore Naomi's dignity in that moment. But it did something just as important. It broke the illusion that everyone agreed. And that illusion is what systems rely on most, because as long as everyone appears aligned, accountability stays abstract. The moment someone dissents, responsibility becomes personal. That's why silence is so useful and so dangerous. It keeps things running smoothly, right up until they collapse. This story isn't really about Lily. It's about the people watching her, the ones who saw her speak and felt exposed. Because her decision forces a question that doesn't stay on the screen. If you had been there, who would you have been? The one enforcing the rule? The one accused? Or the one watching, hoping someone else would act first? There's no villain music when silence wins. No dramatic confrontation. Just a series of moments that pass without resistance, and later, a vague discomfort that's easy to ignore. Until a story like this brings it back. Silence can keep you legally clean, but it never keeps you morally neutral. It always leans toward whoever already holds the power. And once you see that, it's hard to unsee. Lily didn't speak because she wanted to be a hero. She spoke because she realized staying quiet meant choosing a side anyway. That's the part most of us forget. You don't get to opt out of impact, only intention. And when injustice is unfolding in front of you, the absence of action is still an action. So the question isn't whether silence is understandable. It is. The question is whether it's harmless. And the answer, every time, is no. Because in moments like these, silence doesn't keep the peace. It keeps the imbalance. So ask yourself, honestly, if you had been there, watching it unfold, who would you have been? The consequences didn't arrive with sirens. They arrived quietly. After the flight landed, there was no public statement waiting at the gate, no announcement over the intercom, no dramatic escort down the aisle. Just systems activating the way they were designed to. Reports finalized, access logs reviewed, internal footage flagged. What happened on that flight didn't stay on that flight. Within hours, North Sky Airlines' internal compliance network began pulling threads, not because someone was angry, but because choices had been made. Evelyn didn't lose her position because she raised her voice. She lost it because she chose to escalate without cause. Brian wasn't disciplined for hesitation. He was reviewed for compliance patterns that showed selective enforcement. Richard didn't face consequences because he accused someone. He faced them because his accusation collapsed under scrutiny. This wasn't revenge. It was accountability doing what it does best when it's finally allowed to work. And Naomi? Naomi didn't celebrate. She didn't correct anyone who misunderstood her role. She didn't stand up and explain who she was. Because this story was never about proving her importance. It was about exposing how casually others dismissed someone else's. That's the part people often miss. Justice didn't arrive because Naomi was powerful. It arrived because people with power made conscious choices, and those choices left evidence. That's where responsibility lives, not in mistakes, in decisions. Every person involved had moments to slow down, to question, to stop. And instead, they leaned into certainty. They leaned into procedure when empathy was required.
They leaned into authority when humility would have sufficed. No one forced them to escalate. They believed they were safe enough to do it. That belief is what failed them. Because systems don't collapse from ignorance, they collapse from confidence, from the quiet certainty that nothing will happen if you act a certain way. That's why Naomi isn't framed as a hero. Heroes rush in. They announce themselves. They demand recognition. Naomi did none of that. She waited. Not passively, precisely. She let the process reveal what it was protecting and what it wasn't. That's the difference between noise and consequence. Noise feels satisfying. Consequence changes behavior. North Sky Airlines didn't reform because of outrage. They reformed because the truth left a paper trail. Training protocols changed. Oversight tightened. Language guidelines rewritten. Not because someone felt embarrassed, but because the cost of pretending nothing happened became higher than the cost of admitting it did. That's how real accountability works. It doesn't need a crowd. It needs clarity. And clarity only emerges when someone refuses to let harmful choices hide behind routine. This story doesn't end with applause. It ends with something quieter. Awareness. Awareness that most harm isn't caused by monsters. It's caused by ordinary people making calculated decisions when they believe no one important is watching. Awareness that power doesn't corrupt suddenly. It invites. It invites shortcuts, assumptions, justifications. And the moment you believe your position protects you from consequence, you stop checking yourself. That's where things break. Naomi didn't break the system. She revealed it. She didn't punish anyone. Their own choices did. That's why this story matters, not because it's dramatic, but because it's familiar. Most of us won't be in her position. Most of us won't have access to oversight tools or internal audits. But most of us will face moments where doing nothing feels safer than doing what's right. Moments where staying quiet feels professional. Moments where we convince ourselves it's not our place. This story asks a simple question. Not what would you do if you had power, but what do you do when you think you don't? Because systems don't only respond to authority, they respond to patterns. And patterns are built by repeated choices, small ones, often unseen. Justice doesn't require spectacle. It requires the right people refusing to look away at the right time. If you've ever been underestimated because you stayed calm, if you've ever been overlooked because you didn't fight back loudly enough, if you've ever been treated like the problem simply because you didn't fit someone else's expectations, you're not alone. And you're not imagining it. The harm was real, even if no one acknowledged it then. Stories like this don't fix everything, but they do something important. They remind us that dignity isn't something you earn by proving yourself. It's something others are obligated to respect, whether they want to or not. So if this story stayed with you longer than expected, if it felt personal in a way you couldn't immediately explain, that's not coincidence. That's recognition. And if you've ever experienced being dismissed in silence, seen but not defended, you already understand why this story doesn't end with shouting. It ends with truth. Quiet. Documented. Impossible to ignore. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who's lived through something similar. Not to relive the anger, but to remind them
and maybe yourself, that justice doesn't need to be loud. It just needs the right moment and the courage to choose differently when it counts.